So I hope the last talk shed some light on what Russell means by knowledge by acquaintance, and perhaps we need to, get straight the sort of things he thinks we're acquainted with. But again, to characterize that sort of knowledge, he says towards the beginning of the chapter, in reference to his knowledge of color, he says, "I know the color perfectly and completely when I see it, and no further knowledge of it itself is even theoretically possible." And it's that sort of experience, the experience of being or attending to or being conscious of something which is simply there, in the sense that our own sense experience is simply there. The sensations are simply fill our consciousness in a certain way. And it's that raw experience of them, I think, is a fair way to characterize it, is what Russell means by knowledge by acquaintance. Well, what sort of things here? He says, well, of course, sense data are the first example he gives of the kind of things that we're acquainted with. He says, sense data, as we have already seen, are among the things with which we are acquainted. In fact, they supply the most obvious and striking example of knowledge by acquaintance. That notion that we're never acquainted with physical objects in the world. We can know truths about physical objects, Russell says. But our own sense experience, the sense data that are presented to us, you might say the sense impressions we have, those we know directly, and they're indubitable. I can doubt whether there's really a cup in front of me right now, but I can't doubt the sensations that I'm having when I presumably look at it, of a certain color, of a certain shape, if I touch it, of a certain texture. Those sensations considered simply as sense data rather than the characteristics of an externally existing physical object that I would call a cup. Those things are indubitable, and those things are experienced in a way that's different from our experience of physical objects, and they're known completely. And it's that simple and complete and exhaustive knowledge of things that I think characterizes knowledge by acquaintance. And again, although he says that sense data supply the most obvious and striking example of knowledge by acquaintance, he goes on to say, but if they were the sole example, our knowledge would be very much more restricted than it is. We should only know what is now present to our senses. We could not know anything about the past, not even that there was a past, nor could we know any truths about our sense data. For all knowledge of truths, as we shall show, demands acquaintance with things which are of an essentially different character from sense data, things which are sometimes called abstract ideas, but which we shall call universals. We have therefore to consider acquaintance with other things besides sense data if we are to obtain any tolerably adequate analysis of our knowledge. We'll see that the category of things with which we are acquainted has more members than just sense data, that there are other things that we are directly acquainted with. He speaks briefly of memories, or our memories of past sense data. He also talks about the things we know through what he calls introspection, that is, attending to the contents of our mind and attending to ourselves. There is some ambiguity, or there is some doubt in his mind as to whether we are directly acquainted with ourselves. And I think that's because he recognizes an ambiguity in the word self. What exactly are we talking about? I think that at least in a limited way, he argues that we do know ourselves, whatever that means, through direct acquaintance. That is, that we know ourselves in a way that is different from the way that we know others, certainly, which is indirectly by way of description rather than direct acquaintance. So memories and ourselves, we, in a qualified way, he says, we know directly. But what else Well, that last thing there, abstract ideas or universal, that's incredibly important. That is, that Russell believes that we are acquainted not only with the raw feels, the raw sensations of sense experience, but that we are able to know intellectual things, intelligible things, concepts, abstract ideas or universals in a different way. I mean, we certainly don't grasp a universal like the universal blue or large or square, which are all examples of concepts or universals or abstract ideas. We certainly don't grasp them in the same way that we grasp the particular sensations that we experience in our experience of the world. However, we do experience them in that sense where he says that when he knows the color, he knows it perfectly and completely, and no further knowledge of it itself is even theoretically possible. That is, when we grasp with our intellect these abstract ideas or universals, I think that's a shared quality, that we grasp them perfectly and completely, and no further knowledge of them is even theoretically possible. Now, we'll go into more detail in later chapters when he talks about universals about this. But that's just by way of explanation of why he includes abstract ideas or universals, concepts, in the same category with sense data as things that we know by acquaintance. So the next step here is to go on to the other side of the content of the chapter and talk about what it means to know something by description.